All right. Well, welcome to the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamoni. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories along with practical tools, actionable insights that will guide you along your healing journey. Together, we'll explore the hidden gifts, lessons, and blessings inside grief and empower you to reclaim your life and create an inspiring future. Today, I have a very special guest that's going to join us today. Her name is Anda Grobbelaar. She's all the way from Cape Town, South Africa, and she's actually one of the first people I talked to doing podcast interviews. And she has an incredible story to share. Like me, she experienced the loss of a child to stillborn, and that's something that we bonded over and connected about. And the ironic part is that she lost her daughter at 9 months, 23 years ago, and my son's birthday is on September 23rd. So there's some synchronicity in the universe going on with that. But that experience led Anda on this beautiful journey that was unexpected to become a future life designer, founder of the Grief to Gratitude Mastermind, and she's become an international speaker and author and has recently started a nonprofit to help people who are going through cancer in her area. So, without further ado, Anda, I want to give you the floor to share your beautiful story because it touched my heart when I heard it, and I'm excited for everybody else to hear it.
Chris, thank you so much for the beautiful introduction. I really appreciate it. But my story started 23 years ago, just like you said, when our second daughter, Bibi, as Lane, my eldest daughter, called her sister, or Analda Grobbelaar, was stillborn at 9 months. So what happened was that, and it's quite rare that this actually happens, her navel cord wrapped around her body 3 times and then went around her neck and actually suffocated her. And that navel cord that was supposed to give her life has actually caused her death. And when we found out, obviously it was an extremely traumatic experience. And when I came out of hospital, the irony of all of the story is that Bibi was born on the 1st of the 8th, the 1st of August. Lane was born on the 8th of the 1st. The first movie we ever took Lane to see in a little snug and safe, 9 months old, was Titanic. The Saturday night I came home from hospital without Bibi, the movie on TV was Titanic. To this day, Lane does not watch Titanic. She doesn't listen to the music that plays. She walks out of the room. And for 4 years, we sort of tried to navigate our way through this journey called grief. And I remember one day I was sitting on the couch at around about 4 o'clock in the afternoon in my pajamas still. And I realized that unless I do something right now, I'm going to spiral down this rabbit hole of deep, dark depression. Because the days before that, when Len got home to check on me, I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to shower. I didn't want to get dressed. I didn't want to go out with my friends for tea and coffee and cake and whatever. I didn't want to cook. I didn't want to do anything. I just wanted to lie in bed and feel sorry for myself. But at that pivotal moment, I realized that I need to do something drastically. Otherwise, I'm going to be lost. And I got up and I went and I showered and I got dressed. And that night, the most amazing thing happened. That night, Laneki put some glittery covering on her head and she came into the kitchen whilst I was cooking. And she was trying to be a clown and trying to entertain me and so on. And the next day, she came back from preschool. She was only 4 at the time. Came back from preschool and drew a picture on a white paper plate for me of mommy crying long tears because Bibi is stillborn. But mommy has a smile on her face when Laneki comes to mommy. So she drew me and she drew her next to me. And then she drew 3 dots in my tummy. And she said, those 3 dots is me and Daddy and Bibi because Daddy put Bibi into. So to this day, that is my most precious picture in this whole house. And what happened after that was truly an amazing experience because instead of focusing on the loss that I have suffered, I started focusing on what I have in my life. I have my husband. I have my 4-year-old daughter. I have a garden. I have a house. And every morning after that, I went outside when I woke up, Lane, opened her curtains and her blinds, and we would say, "Good morning, world, and thank you, God, for giving us another day. And look how beautiful this day is." And it didn't matter whether it was raining outside, whether the sun was shining, or whether the wind was blowing. It was a beautiful day. And when she came back in the afternoons after preschool, I would take her in the garden and I would show her the differences in the color of green on the lawn where there was shade and where there was sun. And we had a rose tree, and there was this little rose bud that was developing and developing. And we'd go and check every single day, how far is this rose bud developed? And it sounds really simple, and maybe to some people actually stupid. But when you're in that arms of grief and depression, and you force yourself to do these things, you realize the power that gratitude has. So for 4 years, Lana and I would sit in the kitchen, not knowing what to do with Bibi's birthday because my husband didn't really know how to deal with this. So he would lie in his room on Bibi's birthday. My mom, who stays with us, would be in her flat. And on year 4th, Laneki came home from primary school, and she was extremely excited that night. And she said, "I know what we're going to do for Bibi's birthday this year." So I said, "What are we doing for Bibi's birthday this year?" And she said, "Mom, Chuck came to visit us, and we can have an angel party for Bibi, and all the presents that our friends' kids would have given Bibi, we can give to the children at Chuck." So uninformed mom goes, "Who's Chuck?" And she says, "Mom, it's the Hospital for Children with Cancer in Tygerberg." And I go, "Wow, you want to have an angel party for children with cancer and you want to give all Bibi's presents to them?" "Yes," she said. So I said, "Okay." So for the last 19 years, we've been hosting annual angel parties for children at Chalk. We give them little care packs, we give the parents something, and we give the caregivers something. And I've been extremely privileged that some of my clients have helped me to refurnish the homes with air conditioners, carpets, furniture some time ago. We've also installed a music system from the rooms to the theater. So when the children are pushed out to theater, they hear this beautiful, soft, soothing music, just calming them down before they go into theater. And it's been the most fulfilling journey. I've met the most amazing people, and I've learned that cancer and grief has no boundaries. I remember one year that we were there was a mom whose child was 3 months old. This mom didn't have money for a toothbrush. And when the parents stay in the houses that are on the premises of Chalk, they need to provide their own food and their own sanitary products. So every year, I'm extremely privileged that people just give. And it's so amazing, So my community where I live has become involved. My clients has become involved in this project. And then last year, 2023, in fact, I spoke to Dr. Alexander McDermott in California. And she said, why don't you just start an NPO? So I finally registered an Anelda Bibi Grobbelaar Foundation at the end of 2024, which I'm extremely excited about because it's now giving us a better opportunity to make a difference in the lives of the children with cancer, their parents, and their caregivers. But I'm also very fortunate in being a member of Mental Resilience Mastery Mastermind run by David Nair, where he has helped me to craft a 3-month mastermind, specifically finding your purpose in your journey from grief to gratitude. Because I honestly believe that unless people understand the process of grief and the different phases that they go through, they become stuck in their grief very easily. And when that happens and they get caught in this rabbit hole of depression, they actually just go on living life on autopilot. And without realizing it, they die within themselves. Just today, I had a lady that contacted me and said she's just seen my advert for the mastermind. And she just wanted to say she lost her twins 34 years ago. Okay. She's only today realized she's never grieved for them. And what has happened in the meantime is that she has thrown herself into her work so much. In her words, she said, I also worked my husband out. And how sad is that? Because often families get divided over a loss like this. So it is my absolute major purpose in life to empower 1 million people to discover their purpose and transform their grief into gratitude, inspired by my journey after healing after stillbirth of my precious daughter Bibi 23 years ago. Because if I can empower 1 million people, I will actually make a difference to 5 million people's lives, and to help them understand grief and to help them navigate their process through that and to find a purpose. How incredibly awesome is that?
That would be beautiful beyond comprehension to change that many lives. I I think that's something that you hit on really well about grief, especially here in the States. We don't have a very good idea of grief. I've been talking to a lot of people lately about the topic of grief, and it's something that's always like in the dark, in the shadows. We just don't really talk about it. It's kind of one of these, everybody sees it as a negative thing, not really a positive thing. And I can share on my personal journey, and I was really glad you shared your story about Bibi, because that loss is tragic. And I think we're part of a club I say we don't want to be part of, being a lost parent, and that's a really hard thing to deal with, because we not only lost this child that we wanted, but we lost this future that we had planned for ourselves in that process. And so something that you hit on really well, and I'm glad you said it today, is that a lot of times when we go through this grief process, we end up on autopilot. And you said it very eloquently. We die in that process. We really do. Something that I've come to learn on my journey after interviewing several people over the last couple months is that um, that death for us is oftentimes a rebirth. We just don't know how to see it and find it sometimes. And so it does take a coach like you or me, or takes a therapist, or takes a pastor, somebody in your world you can trust, somebody that will hear your story and understand you and give you that ability to feel seen and heard and understood, to really explore that rebirth. But when you go through grief, it's very easy to get trapped in that world of depression. It's very easy to get stuck on autopilot and slowly die away. It's very easy to be there. And I can share, I was there much after I lost my son, Caden. I was there for at least a good year and a half, I'd say. It took me a long time until recently to come out of that. And so I appreciate you sharing that side of grief, because that's something that everybody tries to just say it's something that we have to let go of and move on, and life is going to continue. And unfortunately, some of these circumstances like stillborn children, there is no moving on because we're always going to think about them and we're always going to wonder what life was like if they were here. Um, I really love that your mission has led you down this road of a nonprofit and to have a goal to help 1 million people. I think that's beautiful.
Thank you so much, Chris. When Bibi was stillborn, I can tell you, I think God and my husband both deserve medals. I fought with them so many times, because I couldn't understand why God would take Bibi when we were in a position to give her a comfortable life, an education, everything she ever wanted. And yet there are parents out there who has babies who doesn't want them, that throw them away, that put them in plastic bags in dustbins. And I just couldn't understand it at the time. But also at the time, Len wrote this absolutely very precious, beautiful letter to Bibi about how he didn't just lose her, exactly what you're saying, how he's lost his dreams for her and the future for her. And it's that sign of love and connection that is testament to the depth of what we lost.
Yeah,
So
that's
grief challenges us, and it makes us reframe our reality. But we find meaning in our pain. But it's ultimately your choice. Okay. Because grief can make you get stuck, and grief can immobilize you, or you can choose to move forward with your grief. And that's the choice I want to give people. I want to give people the option to move forward with their grief, to say, whether it was a loss of a loved one, a loss of a stillborn child, a loss of a house, a loss of a job, a loss of a life stage, a loss of a limb, a loss of a pet. Grief is grief. Doesn't matter. Grief is grief. The cycle this is still the same. The process is still the same. So we can never go and say, I lost a baby at 9 months and it's so sad. But you lost a husband at, let's say, 23 or 25 or 30 years, and that's really sad. But you still had 35 years to live with him. I didn't have that. So should my grief take preference? No,
hmm.
no. Grief is grief. That's the way it is. It's an ache and it's a teacher, and it guides us to honor what we have whilst we're learning to embrace the future and the present.
I think that's what's beautiful about grief. And I can only say this to where I'm at healed today. So for anybody listening to this is not something that, and I think Anna would agree with me on this, this isn't going through a loss and going through grief and just saying, it is what it is and moving on. That's just not going to happen for you. But you'll discover a place along your grief journey where you can get to that place to see those things. I can share, on my personal grief journey, I dealt with anger a lot. And that's really as a man and in American culture, by the way, where men know anger really well, but we don't know those other feelings of grief. And something that I learned in the stillborn community, especially, men are very forgotten. We're not very considered. We're not very understood. We're not really given space to grieve. We're not even taught how. And, um, something I learned on that journey, by the way, being a lost parent, is that all of our journeys through grief are very individual. There is no one size fits all box for how you can work through grief or how you can handle it or how you can control it or move on from it. There's just not a one size fits all box. And so, kind of like you, Amanda, I encourage everybody to embrace their individual journey with grief and understand that there's going to be people that can move through grief in a month. There's going to be people it takes 20 years to get through it. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's a very individual process. But I think that there's always underneath these situations that happen in life where there's always a gift and a lesson and a blessing. And it takes us a long time sometimes to get to that place to see it. And I know you mentioned when you were telling Bibi's story to me the first time that celebrating her birthday was a very hard thing. And then 5 years later, you kind of hinted at that today, but 5 years later, your own daughter came to you with a very selfless act and a very selfless contribution, to go help other children that are going through cancer and going through loss, just like you guys did. And to think about what a beautiful thing that is for you, let alone a child coming to you and offering that gift of that memory of Bibi. That's just one of those places where I want to demonstrate that to our listeners today. This didn't happen right away when Anna lost Bibi. It didn't happen a year after, 2 years after, 3 years after. This was 4 or 5 years down the road that that gift showed itself. And so I just wanted to highlight that, Anda, because that's a beautiful part of your story and a beautiful part of your grief journey, to show people that this isn't something you have to move through quickly or get over fast. It's really about taking your journey for fully what it is and being aware, listening, and understanding where that process is at for you and making the most of it.
You know, Chris, if Lene didn't come that day and said we can have angel parties for children with cancer to celebrate Bibi's birthday, I wouldn't be sitting here today. I wouldn't have written my own story. I wouldn't have co-authored 2 other books with 29 people from 6 countries. I wouldn't be running a mastermind. I wouldn't be doing any of this if it wasn't for her on that day coming and say, we need to have a mastermind. We need to have an angel party. I wouldn't be here. But I do want to say that, you know, every person, just like you said, grieve differently. However, as a family, you need to make the time to grieve together. And that often is the point where people don't know how to do this. So Len and I used to lie in Bibi's room on the double bed that we've put in there for her and me to lie on, and for Len to join us when he wanted to. And we would listen to the music of Dying Young. And it's beautiful, 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 soothing music. But it's very heartful music because it's from that movie, Dying Young, where this young man contracted AIDS and then prepared to die. And he spent time with his caregiver, and how they went through the emotions and processed everything. And I'm very fortunate that Len and I did that. And I'm very fortunate that we could pull a nay with the limited understanding that she had at the time into that process. Because imagine if I had to grieve as a silo island on my own, Len grieved as an individual island on his own, and Laneki just acted up because she didn't know what to do with her feelings. She didn't understand this. The chaos that we would have in our family. And that's why I understand, you know, if you don't together understand this process and practice the steps and show the compassion to each other together, that families actually break up. Because
That,
I
yeah,
wouldn't be
I'm
able to tell my feelings to you. You wouldn't be able to share your feelings with me because you think I don't understand and I think you don't understand it. And when we do talk to each other, we fight because, and it's chaos,
yeah,
you know.
it's I spoke to a woman yesterday that, or not yesterday, on Sunday, I think it was, that she lost a stillborn just like we did, and she and her husband divorced after that, and they couldn't make it work. And I found that story very sad, by the way, because of exactly what you said, that, while we do grieve individually in different paths on our journey, when you're in that situation, it is very important to go through that process as a family. And I can share my own experience. I won't go into my story, but that parts of that, because I'll lose it. But I'll just say that it was very important for me to be there with my wife that through that whole moment, that whole entire thing. And there were times that I went through the grief process of feeling numb, feeling angry, feeling sad, feeling frustrated, overwhelmed, depressed. You feel 10 different things at once. And speaking from the husband side of things and the father of the family, it's a very different experience because you're having to watch your wife go through this. And when you're watching your wife going through so many body changes, and on top of that, the emotional and mental side of that type of loss, it's so important to, in my opinion, be strong in your partnership at that point or strong in your marriage, wherever you're at. Because I think that, um, it takes two people in that moment to come together. And I'm glad you brought this topic up because I've experienced death in different situations, stillborn and also watching my grandfather die from cancer. And I've seen that death brings out the worst in people. I don't know why, but it brings out the worst. And it always brings out a selfish capacity to sometimes destroy other people, sometimes hurt other people's feelings, make people not feel seen and heard, exhibit power and authority where it's not needed, taking on that situation as your own when it's not your own experience. I've seen an array of different things happen. And I will say that one of the most beautiful things I experience is exactly what you just talked about, where you and Len and Lene came together as a family after losing Bibi, and you guys grieved together. You gave space for that. You gave space to heal together. And that's something that I was very important, is very important to me when my wife and I lost Caden. It was very important to me that I'm by my wife's side and we're going through this together and not individually, because I think that when you deal with really heavy losses like that, and I talk about a lot of them in trauma and grief space, as I'm sure you do, but it's a very heavy thing, and it can consume you and take over you. Um, and to have that support and have that love and that compassion from somebody, that empathy, whether that's your partner, your spouse, a therapist, a coach, a doctor, to have somebody there that can help you on that path just makes it a little easier. And I mean minimally easier as you work through that, but it's a comfort thing there, that can really be an integral part of your healing process.
I think that when you're in that moment and in that space, um, people like you and me who have gone through this, who knows what it feels like, are just able to help the grieving people at that point to dig deep into themselves, to find that resilience, that ability to recover from that great adversity, that great loss, that great challenge, that great setback, so that they navigate their route through this process. And, we help them to build resilience because that's what they need at the time, is to know that it's an extremely sad, traumatic experience, but it is important that their lives does not stop here, that they can move forward with their grief. They're never going to move forward from their grief because their grief is also always going to be there. And that's the important thing, is that they need to understand, because I think many people think that society allows me to grieve for such a long period and then I have to bury my grief and I have to move on with my life.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
that's the difficult, dangerous path that we take because society expects. But we know, as parents that have gone through that and parents that have experienced that, that is not the right thing to do. You need to acknowledge your grief. You need to work. If it takes you 2 years to work through it, then take 2 years to work through it. But get
Yeah.
to a point where you can move forward comfortably with your grief. And, you know, it sounds really terrible, but rebuild your life, because that is what you have to do. You have to rebuild your life without the person or the thing that you lost at the time.
That's
But you
that.
can, and it is okay to do that. People need to know that it's okay to move forward from your grief, with your grief.
Well, that's what was really the hardest part for me on my healing journey, to be very honest with you. After I lost my grandfather, that one was a little easier because I had, 33 years with him. I had all these memories. He taught me all these things. And I got myself to a place where I said, I can celebrate his life. And so I don't have sadness as much as I do celebration for him every day. And that got me through that grief. But when I lost my son, I can share, confidently with you, this last Christmas, it got hard, and this is going on 3 years. It got hard, and some people think, oh, you're a coach, you should have this like figured out and have all these solutions. And I go, I'm just like you, my friend. I deal with grief just like you. Something that you hit on though that I want to highlight is a rebirth of people. Recently what I found out about my own grief journey, and I wanted to share because you built on that, is that when we go through grief and loss, when we go through these traumas, what's really happening to us inside is that we're shedding the layers of who our old self is, and what we're actually doing is meeting our new version of ourself. And it's very scary. It's very turbulent because it's unknown and it's new to us. And so it's almost like when you meet a new person or you go on a first date and you have all these jitters and these nerves of how I'm going to be perceived and who is this person and am I going to like them or are they going to like me? And you're having all those thoughts going on. Grief is a lot like that. You're shedding all this stuff of your old self that's not going to be there, and you're going to end up being this total different person. And that's something that I'll share. This podcast, the Empower Grief Journey podcast, I created it because I wanted to have a collective of grief stories. And then I realized I'm creating a legacy for my son by allowing other people to come on here and share their grief stories. But through that, I'm able to help people on their grief journey because they might hear Anda's story, they might hear Dwayne's story, they might hear, person X's story, and they might get one thing out of that when they're in that dark place and say, that's the thing I needed to hear today. And that's the thing that's going to move me forward in my day. And so I think it's beautiful that, all of our grief journeys, while they're individual and unique, they all have a tiny piece within them that is going to resonate with somebody. And it's going to be the thing that helps that one person get out of that place they're in and really start to see that rebirth, as you said, that place where they can move forward and be okay.
But Chris, this is the preciousness of the work that you are doing, because you're not only just creating a legacy for you, you're also helping me to create a legacy for me by letting me share my story. And that numbness, that fear, that guilt, that anger, that sadness that you feel when you're going through this and you get into that shutdown mode and you disconnect it from the natural responses that overwhelms you, it's exactly what you just said. Somebody's going to listen to this and somebody's going to take one takeaway from that. And who knows, we might make a difference to that one person's life. And you know the story of the guy that walked on the beach, and there were these millions of starfish that washed out on the beach. And this old man went and he walked and he picked up the starfish one by one and he threw them back into the ocean. And this little boy came to him and said to him, "Old man, why are you throwing the starfish one by one back into the ocean? There's millions of them that washed out on the beach." And the old man picked up the starfish and he looked at it and he showed it to this young boy and he said, "Young man, if I can make the difference to this one starfish life and save this today, I have made my life complete." And that is what our lives are all about.
That is beautiful. I have never heard that story before, but that is an incredibly good example.
It's a beautiful
Wow.
story.
That's beautiful. I I think that's really the mission of grief that I've tried to inspire people that I've come across my path recently. I had a guy that is suicidal that I've been talking to, and he's one of the most phenomenal people I've ever met. Truthfully, he's gone through a lot of hardship. He's got a brain tumor. He's just really, having a hard time in life right now, but he's been one of the most inspiring people for me to meet, because he's gotten to that place of acceptance in his life. He's gotten to that place of I know where I'm at, and there's things I want to do about it. I want to take back control of my life. I want to reclaim who I am. And um, he's just been so inspiring to me because of his story he's told. And I talked to another guy yesterday that shared his suicide story with me, and same thing. I just was so inspired to see somebody that's gone to such dark levels in their grief. Very, I mean, places I haven't gone personally, so I don't know what that's like. But to hear what's come out of these journeys for these people that have gone to darker places than me, and um, to see the beautiful things that they're doing. And it's just it's like you said, about the starfish story. When you might throw back 500 of them, but there's a million on the beach. But that 500 you threw back, there's going to be a huge impact and a huge difference with that. And that's where I think, in this grief journey, we have the ability to reclaim our lives. It's just going to look different. And that's where, we're given such a gift on this planet, and we're given such a gift through these horrible things. I can say that had I not lost my son, I might not be a coach. I might not have started a podcast. I might not have met you. I might not have been able to talk to all these wonderful people with beautiful stories of life and create a legacy and help others create their legacy. I might not ever have gotten that without my son. And so, I got looked at funny a couple years ago when I said, I'm really grateful for my son, and I appreciate and I love him unconditionally to this day. There's not a day I don't think about him, truth be told. And I realized that recently. And this guy said, how can you be so grateful when that horrible thing happened? Your son's not here. He was stillborn. And I said, if I live there and I stay in that place, it's a very destructive place. It's a very dark place. And I can't handle the pressure or the feeling of that. It's too much for me. And so I said, there's got to be something good to come from this, even when we're in the darkest of our moments. And I've learned that on my faith journey with God over the last 5 years, even in the darkest of our moments and the days where we don't see the light and the days that we don't see hope or an outcome that we want or even any good of what happens, there's always something small there, and you will always find it, no matter what it is. And I can tell you, I've run across people randomly in public. I've run across homeless people. I've run across people that were selling things on the corner, and they are people that have broken lives just like me. The funny part is, they're not focused on that story. What they are focused on is creating a new one from that experience. And so, there's just so much beauty to be found within grief. And grief is really pain and love at the same time. That's what grief is. It's I don't know what you want to call it, but a very intertwined connectedness of both beauty and pain mixed together. And when you find that gift, it's when you embrace those things full-heartedly for what they are, not what you think they are. And you give yourself that space to just create something beautiful from it.
You know, what you're saying is so true in that there are people that go through grief far more deeper than what you and I have gone. Um, and I think maybe it's because we just look at things differently because we realize that if we can bring gratitude into this, when you practice gratitude, the things that you look at change. And that's what it's about, is that you need to bring gratitude into this because when you focus on that loss continuously, I saw a beautiful video today on Instagram of a strawberry that was already wilting. And the scientists took the strawberry and attached it to a healthy strawberry and a healthy strawberry. And on day one, the sick strawberry became really sicker and sicker and sicker. Day two, the second strawberry became sicker and sicker and sicker and sicker. And day three, the third strawberry was also sick. And he had to throw all three of them because they were moldy and you couldn't eat them and anything. And that's really what happens to people when you hang around negative people. When you hang around the people that said, I told you not to do that. I told you don't do this, and they just negative all the time. That's what's going to happen to you. But when you surround yourself with strong people, stronger than what you are, in these moments of grief, guess what's going to happen to you? They're going to lift you up and they're going to make you stronger. And that's what we want. We want people to focus on these strengths. Yes, the loss is there. Yes, the anger, the guilt, the heartache, the numbness, the everything else is there. And you need to acknowledge that because you need to work through that. But don't get stuck in that. And that's what happened to the strawberry. It was stuck in that grief. And
That,
that's, I can't say this enough that is why it's my passion to teach people about moving forward with their grief.
so I wanted to ask you that as we were getting towards the end of the session here. I wanted to ask you a few questions. If you were to talk to somebody today, somebody who's listening to this podcast and they're early on in their grief journey, what would be something you would share, whether that's advice or something that you would come up with? What would you share with them to help them as they start their grief journey?
Number one, acknowledge your feelings and your emotions. Don't hide them. Work through them. Practice compassion and self care. Allow your friends to make you tea and to be close to you. Don't listen to negativity. Focus on what you can be grateful for and see the light to start moving forward with your grief and live a full life.
That's beautifully said. That's wonderful advice. I wish I had heard early on in my grief journey. Um, I wanted to ask you too, you touched on earlier that you had become an author, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about your nonprofit as well. How did you end up in that space of becoming an author? What led you on that road?
So I studied psychology, and when we went through this grieving phase, I decided that I probably need to read up and understand this whole process a little bit more. We touched on it when I was studying, but because you don't go through it every day and you don't experience it, you don't understand it. So I read a lot of books, and I'm not the type of person that can just read a book. When I read a book, I make notes. So I had a stack of notes after 2 years. And my husband came and he said, You know, you've read up so much and you made so much notes. Why don't you write your own book? So I did. I wrote Bibi's story. I wrote the story of how we navigated our journey from grief to gratitude, but I incorporated a lot of the notes that I've made. So I explained the process of grief and the different phases. And I've got poems in there that I got from a friend or two. So it's a really, really honest story of how you can get through your grief. And then when I joined the Mental Resilience Mastermind, I was very fortunate to be invited to co-author a book with 29 authors from 6 different countries. And I got to tell Bibi's story again. And before that, I co authored a book with 10 women in India, also sharing Bibi's story. Women of Power is the book called. So I've been extremely fortunate that I could have written the stories and get the books published, and the books are out there and it's available to the whole world to read. But you know what was the one big thing in 2023 for me? I got invited to go and tour through India for 21 days, talking about mental resilience and sharing Bibi's story. For 21 days, I went through, I think, 7 or 8 or 9 cities, and I got to address 8,500 people. How incredible is that?
That's amazing.
Yes. That's amazing. So, just like what you said earlier, if your son wasn't stillborn, you wouldn't be sitting here. You wouldn't have started the podcast. The same as if Bibi wasn't stillborn, I wouldn't be able to do all these things that I'm doing. I spoke to people in California TV. I've been on 10 News Live 3 times in Australia. Um, and here I sit with you today, all because of Bibi. What
That's just
an incredible journey.
That's just the beauty of grief. And I love that I love your story. And I'm always kind of taken away and speechless sometimes because you are just the living example of what can happen when you transform your grief and your personal pain into personal power and make something really great with that experience. I can't stress that enough in my life. And I'm early on in my grief journey compared to where you're at, and I'm looking forward to having the opportunities that are going to come my way from it. And I'm pretty confident to say that, 23 years, you probably never thought you would be in this place in your life, never touring India, never being interviewed on that scale, writing books. All of that came out of that experience of Bibi, and that's just the beautiful gift that she gave you, which I think is just inspiring.
So I must just tell you something that we had Bibi cremated and we keep her in a little silver canister. And she's got the silver plate that she stands in, and she's got roses next to her. And every now and then, when we go for a walk, I'll take her with me to go for a walk. If I really miss her a lot, then I put her under my cushion and she can sleep with me. Sometimes I put her in my handbag and I take her to work with me. You know what? It sounds maybe really ludicrous to some people, but she was a part of our lives for 9 months where she lived inside of me. And she will be a part of my life until the day I die. And I'm not going to deny the fact that she was stillborn and that she's not here and that she should be buried somewhere in a hole in the ground, with all due respect. This is my way of honoring her, of still making her part of our lives, and just saying thank you to her, actually, for bringing all this magic into my life, because that is what this is about. She's bringing magic to my life.
I think that's so beautiful. I want to thank you for sharing that. That's a very personal side of loss that I don't even open up to many people. But since you inspired me today, I'll share that. I have Caden's ashes above my bed on my nightstand every night, and so I like you when I was faced with that decision. They said, we can make burial arrangements at a cemetery, and I said, I don't want my son in some cold hole in the ground and some foreign place that if I move, he's never going to be with me. I said, I can't do that. And so I like you, I had him cremated, and he's there every night when I go to bed. He's always with me, and I have a little necklace with his name on it and a poem about him. And yeah, I love that you shared that. That's one of the most vulnerable and just beautiful things that I think more people should talk about. And I've thought about taking my son with me on places I just never have for whatever reason, but I can understand that process and I can relate to that, just how meaningful that is. And so I just want to say thank you for sharing that.
You know what I do to Bibi sometimes? Because she sits in a little canister and the ashes just sag down to the bottom and it becomes compressed. So I take her and I give her a little shake up and I say, wake up, wake up, wake up. Time to wake up.
I love that. I'm sure she appreciates that. I wouldn't be
I'm
surprised.
sure she does. She says, oh my God, here comes my mother again. She's going to shake me up.
I love that. Well, and I wanted to ask before we wrap up the show, if people want to get in touch with you, learn about your books that you've written, follow you on social media, or if you have a website, where can people find you and connect with you?
So I'm working on my website at the moment, but I do have a link tree and I have a Facebook page under Grobbelaar and Instagram under Grobbelaar. But they can also just email me directly at under.grobbelaar at gmail.com. I would appreciate connecting to them.
Awesome. Well, I want to let listeners know today, if you're listening to this on Podbean or you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to have the links to Anda's social profiles and her link tree available to you guys so you guys can all connect with her. I just want to say, on a personal note, she's been one of the most transformative people I've talked to on my grief journey and on my podcast. And I'm just really grateful to have had you on the show today. This has meant a lot to me personally, but I think listeners, when they hear this episode, are going to have a lot of takeaways on how to move forward with their grief and learn how to better explore that rebirth of themselves and give themselves the opportunity to see the gifts and the lessons and the blessings through the grief process that they're going through.
Chris, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I wish you all the best with your journey because, in 23 years' time, you're going to look back and you say, oh my gosh, did I accomplish all of this because of Keaton? How fortunate am I? And I will be there next to you.
I love that. Well, I know we're going to be in touch as we go forward because there's just lots of places for us to connect. And so I just want to say I appreciate you being on the show today. And for our listeners, I just want to let you guys know this show will be up on Podbean and YouTube for you guys to listen to. Thank you for joining me today on today's episode of the Empower Grief Journey. I hope you guys enjoyed Anda's story and her tips on having an empowered grief journey. That's what Anda's been doing for the last 23 years. I'll be back next week with another episode with another guest at that point, but I want to wish everybody the best on their grief journey. And just to remember that your journey is unique to your own. And I want you to be empowered as you travel that process and be kind to yourself. We'll be back with another episode soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.